Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser, and for today's episode, I have on with me a very special guest. Let's welcome in Bobby Pignato. He is the singer, also guitarist for two West Palm Beach, Florida bands, Woodies and One Dog's Opinion. Bobby, welcome in. How are you?
I'm doing great, sir. How are you? Pleasure to be here.
I am doing fantastic. Great to have you on. And we have a lot to get to because you have been a very busy musician in your life. You've done a lot of really great things in Palm Beach. And I'm glad to have you on to tell the story today. So, you ready to get started?
I am. Let's do this.
Let's do it. All right. Let's go. Let's do it. So, I want to go back to your early beginnings, kind of where you grew up. I know when we talked before we started recording, you mentioned that you're kind of lived in Palm Beach and you were kind of born in Palm Beach. So is that where it all began for you?
Yes, sir. I was born and raised in West Palm Beach. My whole life, spent 41 years there. So yeah, I probably was born and lived in the same 5 mile square for my whole life till I moved up here to Tennessee. So Florida's in my blood.
It doesn't leave, it just stays there. So
It's like a stink.
it is. So where'd you go to high school in Palm Beach?
I went to Forest Hill High School.
Forest Hill High School. So when you were going to high school, what was that like for you in terms of music? Were you getting into new things then? Were you influenced by any kids you were going to school with? What was that like?
Yeah, I got a brother who's 3 years older than me, Charlie. So he was a big influence musically. But once I got into high school, I was in this transition of going from the typical rock bands, like I was into Kiss and AC/DC and Thin Lizzy. And I met a guy named Tim Swingle, who became kind of my hero and mentor. He played bass in the band F for a while out of Miami or Lauderdale, wherever they were from originally.
It's funny
So
about F because no matter who I talk to, no one really knows like where F. Some people say they're from Palm Beach. Some say they're from Fort Lauderdale. Some people say they're from Miami. I got to get somebody from F on this podcast so we can find out where was F from. So
I think
anyway,
currently they're Miami, but back then I think they were kind of out of Palm Beach County, kind of South Palm Beach County maybe. But so he was the bass player that was on their first recording. He was on like 4 or 5 songs. And so he was a kid in high school that had the mohawk and played bass in a band. So it was like, oh my gosh, he's a rock star. So he kind of taught me really how to play guitar. And he would play my guitar and teach me AC/DC songs on the bass and show me how to play. So getting into high school, I really started getting into more punk rock, but I was never into crazy thrashy punk rock. I was into more melodic stuff like Husker Du, later Husker Du and Replacements and Soul Asylum and stuff. But Tim Swingle was a big guy for me that kind of got me into a new phase. And AC/DC, it was dying out, and Kiss had already died out for me. But so started getting into punk rock into high school.
what were your parents listening to back then?
My mother was a big Motown person. She loved Smokey Robinson and Sam and Dave and that kind of Motown thing. She was born and raised in West Palm as well. So she had seen Elvis and the Big Bopper and all these people back in the 50s when they were touring around before they had really made it. But she was more into Motown. So I heard a lot of kind of Motown going on growing up. She loved music. So there was always something playing in the house. And she encouraged us to get into music. And having a brother who was 3 years older than me, um, Frampton Live and Alice Cooper and Kansas albums and the typical Ted Nugent, Aerosmith and stuff was kind of what I was hearing growing up. So Kiss was the big thing that got me into really music, but I didn't really get into it to like play music. I just watched them and was like, oh, these guys are crazy. I never really dreamed of being like a rock star. That kind of came in as a joke later on in life. So
What do you remember about your first concert? Was it in Palm Beach?
Yeah, my first concert, my mom took us to the West Palm Beach Auditorium, and we went and saw Three Dog Night when I was like 7 or 8 years old. So that was my first concert ever. And then she actually took me to my second concert, which was Kiss in 1979. But that was up in Maryland. My mom had met my future stepfather. So we moved to Maryland for a few years. And so my second concert was Kiss. So unfortunately, it was the Dynasty tour, which was kind of the end of Kiss for me. But
But they
so
were
yeah,
still wearing the makeup though, right?
well, there's still the makeup and all that, but they had switched to these new costumes and the "I Was Made for Loving You" era, and but they still played all the old songs. So Three Dog Night and Kiss were my entries into concerts.
I do like I Was Made for Loving You. I know maybe that's a guilty sin. I don't know. But
It grew on me back then. It was like what the heck, but now it's like, you know what? I'm not a snob anymore.
that's great. So I want to talk about kind of getting into more of the smaller places, not necessarily the auditoriums, but more so like the clubs and that sort of thing. Because I know back then, depending on how old you were, you may or may not have been able to get into certain places. So when was that for you? Do you remember like your first like show at a club or something to that effect?
And a club would probably been my brother used to take us down to the Cameo because down in Miami Beach because back then nobody played West Palm Beach, so they were all stopping in probably Orlando and then skipping down to Miami. So before Respectable Streets opened up in like '87, you had to go down the Cameo to really catch all the bands we wanted to see. So that was kind of the main thing. And then not being old enough, like I said, I turned 21 in '87, so they changed the drinking law on my birthday. So just as I turned 19, they kicked me out 2 more years. So I had to wait
That's
2
terrible.
years to go to bars and clubs like that. So Cameo was probably the big thing that we would go.
What do you remember about some of the bands you were seeing down at the Cameo at that time?
Oh, just chaos and like just the mosh pits when the Bad Brains were playing, or geez, we saw everyone down there. Circle Jerks and Butthole Surfers and Bad Brains and Replacements even played there. So just the mosh pits and how the place was just a disaster after they ripped out all the chairs and tore things off the walls, but it was just heaven. Too bad it was so far away for us because I mean we would have lived there if we could, but it was kind of a pain in the butt at 16, 17, 18 to drive all the way to Miami for us. But that place was like the Mecca because nobody else was doing anything till Respectable Streets opened up. And then once they opened up, I mean, I saw Killing Joke and Meat Puppets and Red Hot Chili Peppers and Fishbone and Camper Van Beethoven. Like all these great bands started playing at Respectable Street. So that kind of saved us. And then once we hit 21, then you could start hitting, the Button and all these clubs down in Miami and stuff that had the, age requirement.
Right. Now, Respectable Street, was that one of the first clubs in the Palm Beach area that you were aware of at that point, or were there any others that you had knowledge of?
To me, that was the first one. By the time I, got to drinking age and could get in, like I don't know exactly where Flynn's and Button South, if that was Palm Beach or if that was Broward County at the time, but Respectable Street was like that was it. That was the thing that opened up and was like, we have our own scene, we have our own thing. Um, there was another one that was going on for a while. At one point, it was called 21 North. It eventually became the Foundation. It may have been something even before 21 North, but they always seem to be a little more of the hardcore kind of, Meat Locker and Raped Ape and those kind of bands would play there, which always scared me. So, so that might have been going on, but Respectable Street was everything at that point.
Yeah. How would you describe Clematis Street back in that time? What was it like?
Bring your boot knife and be prepared to pay some crackhead $5 to watch your car, because it was a sketchy scene back in '87. A lot was going on down there. A lot that you didn't want to get involved with was going down there. I mean, you went down there if you were looking, to grab a little smoke or something from some guy standing on the corner. But once crack kicked up in West Palm Beach and around the world, going down the respectable streets in '87 was like, all right, let's just hope nothing gets broken into while you're in there trying to enjoy yourself.
That's right. Well, I imagine though, you being at that age where you were just, feeling that this scene now is right in your backyard. You didn't have to drive down to Miami to go see some of these bands because they were coming to Palm Beach. So while you're going to these shows and stuff, like at what point does it hit you that you want to play music yourself?
Well, I had already been playing in some bands for a while at that point. Um, it really started out as a joke. I was the best tennis player, air guitar player east of the Mississippi when I was a kid. And so I would get caught all the time jamming Thin Lizzy live and Ted Nugent live, playing to a tennis racket. So one Christmas, I probably was like 13, my mother bought me this fake plastic guitar as a joke. And I was like, oh, it's not even a real guitar. And she was like, well, do you want a real guitar? And I was like, sure. So they bought this thing out of the Sears, catalog that was the worst guitar ever. But to me, it was my first guitar. So about 13, 14, I got this piece of junk, piece of wood that had strings on it and called it a guitar. And I went to this guy to take lessons. And so I go in and he's like, all right, we're going to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the guitar. And I'm going, can you teach me the intro to Don't Fear the Reaper? Now, I've never played guitar, but I'm like, you can teach me Blue Oyster Cult, right? And he was like, no, we're going to do here. So I quit and left and never went back. Then I moved back to Florida when I was like 15. I moved away at 11. I came back at 15. And that's when I ran into Tim Swingle and another buddy in high school named Ian Scott, who was a pretty good guitar player. So at that point was kind of like, well, like at least playing some bands at this point. So teach me some bar chords and some things and start messing around. So about 15, 16, really started kind of going, let's play guitar. And some guys from high school, one guy got a couple of drums and one guy had a bass. And so we started messing around at that point. And I played in some bands with some buddies of mine, Chad McKinney and Daryl Shea. But we never left. His family owned a cabinet workshop and a wood shop. And we would used to practice there 4 and 5 nights a week, but we never played a gig. We were too nervous and scared to actually leave the warehouse. So we would just bring people up to us and tell them to get real drunk and listen to us so we'd sound good. But so then about 88, 89, I started playing with some guys. And then 1990, I ran into some guys that I went to high school with. And that's when Hooded Woodies started. And that was the first band that I really started playing out and playing parties. And then the Foundation was the first like gig in a bar in a club that I actually played in. So I was kind of a late bloomer. I wanted to be an artist and a painter like my brother and my father. I didn't want to be a rock star really, or a guitar player. But then I saw Angus and it was like from AC/DC and was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. Now this is kind of cool. So, maybe I can do this and just have fun with it. So, but really 1990 with Hooded Woodies was kind of my foray into playing out and really going, let's do this more often. So I was a late bloomer.
Were there other bands on that bill that were local too that you can remember from that first show?
I don't remember if we played with anybody, but I know at that time Freaks with Beaks was a big thing going on. We played with Milky Filth, Native Tongues, Postface. Spice was a band back then. I remember them really being around, and I remember Meat Locker and, like I said, Rape Ape and that, but we never really played with them. But the other bands, those were the bands we really started playing with. And then Abacos picked up, Spanky's was there. And then there was a little place downtown for a while that I don't hear many people talking about. It was called Artsbar. And they were downtown for a couple of years, and we played there a bunch. I think some of the flyers I sent you actually say Artsbar on, and that was a cool little place. So, but yeah, Milky Filth, Spice, Native Tongues, Freaks with Beaks. Those are kind of a lot of the names originally that, and then later on, like Black River Circus came around, Doorway 27, Box Elder, some bands like that that I remember that kind of came what seemed like right after that initial year or two.
Right. So when you're playing these shows, right, and after you got that first one under your belt, how were you able to get your next gig and then your gig after that? Was there someone who was helping book you guys, or what was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, not really at first. We had a friend of ours who was quote unquote going to be our manager, and he was this big kind of muscly guy. So we figured he could go in and like make sure we got paid, and got paid back then meant nothing, but made a few dollars for gas money. But really, just the great thing for us is because we were all the same age. By the time we really started going, we were like 23. So all of our friends that were coming out 23, 20 could drink. So when we went to Abacos and the foundation, everyone could actually buy alcohol. That in the day opened up the door, because at the foundation one time we had 185 people that paid to come through the door, not counting people who got free through there. So there's like 200 people showing up to see Hooded Woodies at one point in the illustrious career, but everybody drank like fishes. So when the bar bill went way up, the club owners immediately went, there's money to be made in this little small scene. So that helped us immensely that all of our friends were alcoholics. So, so it was a good thing.
So as the Hooded Woodies, you guys were playing originals or covers? Like, what was your playlist like?
Always original. I didn't have any desire to play covers kind of starting out. And I was never a big fan of, not a big fan, I was just never big on learning other people's music. For some reason, I felt like if I listened to AC/DC, I sounded like AC/DC. If I listened to The Cure, then I sounded like The Cure. So I never really learned anybody else's songs. I just wanted to be a songwriter, guitar player. And I kind of fell into singing by accident just because I was writing these songs, and the bass player at the time had his own song. He was a great songwriter. Daryl Shea was a great bass player, great songwriter, great singer, but he couldn't sing my stuff really because I sang it in my own style and my own cadence and my own kind of timing. And he struggled with it playing the bass and trying to learn my kind of patterns. So he started making me sing, but it was always original music. I had no desire. If you wanted to make money, you played in cover bands. If you just wanted to rock out, you did your own thing and you didn't care about if there were 10 people or 50 people, if you made any money or whatever. I just wanted to write songs and play them. So cover was never, we ended up covering songs, but it'd be like one song in a set, but we were always original.
When you were drawing on things to help write your lyrics, what were those things you were drawing from at that time?
At that time, I was a big Husker Du fan, big Replacements, Soul Asylum. I was because my brother he worked at Peaches out there, the old Peaches records and tapes on Okeechobee. So everybody knew my brother Charlie. So having a 3 year older brother, I've heard everything and listened to things and was open. So to me, it was REM, it was The Cure, it was Husker Du, it was Ted Nugent. But back then, at that time, it was getting into the mid '80s, so it was more a melodic period for Husker Du. and even the replacements were slowing down. So I was kind of big into, I was going to be the next Bob Mould without trying to be the next Bob Mould from Husker Du. So that was my big plan in life, was to be the local Bob Mould.
I imagine you have seen Husker Du or Bob Mold in your lifetime at all.
I've seen Bob Mould a few times, but I'm going to tell this story because my brother rubs it into me. For the rest of my life, I'm going to hear this story. There was a time in 80 something, I forget what it was, and my brother was like, hey, Husker Du is playing down at the Fireman's Hall in like Fort Lauderdale. And I was going to this party. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to go to this party instead. They'll be back. So I didn't go to the show. And my friend, Chris Hare, he was into Husker Du, nothing major, was like, yeah, I'll go. So my best mate ends up going to the show. I don't. And Husker Du never comes back. So I never get to see Husker Du live in my entire life. And my brother rides me like a rented mule about not going to that damn show. And to this day, now in 2021, I took my brother up to Minneapolis. We went to go see Bob Mould at First Avenue. And we ran into Greg Norton, the bass player. And we hung out with him for a while and chatted and caught up on some stuff. And he remembers that show. And he gave me shit because my brother made sure to tell him that I didn't go see Husker Du when I had my one chance in my life. But I have seen Bob Mould now a couple times solo and in a band, so I've made up for some of it.
Some of it. I would have do the same thing though if I was your brother. I would have. I mean, I think a lot of us said that, especially, oh, they'll be back, and then they'll be back never happens. And
yeah, I mean, there's so many bands that came through South Florida that, back in the day, that you were going to catch them once or twice and that was it. Because growing up, like I said, no one stopped at West Palm. You either did the auditorium, which held a couple thousand people, or you had to go down to Miami where the clubs were, where you could play to a couple hundred people. So if you missed them, sometimes that was your one and only shot, and that was my one. So I'm going to go ahead and fess up to it and go, I miss Husker Du for you, Charlie. I'm telling that story.
I feel your pain. Because that's a big loss. But you saw Bob Mould a few times, so you made up for it a little bit. So
absolutely. Sure.
So, did the Hooded Woodies ever record any music in a studio and put anything out?
We never recorded anything. The only thing that was ever captured was a guy used to come into the foundation, and he was a student at the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale. And he liked us. So for a project, we went in and he recorded one song for a class thing that he had to do. And I wish I knew where he was. It was a long, drawn out process because he was a student and his mentor just sat there and we spent all night trying to get it done. But that was the first introduction to any kind of a studio that I had ever been into. And his name was Rob. I don't know his last name, but I wish I could run into him and thank him for that, because that was the coolest thing in the world. But we recorded nothing. But we were blessed. I mean, we started playing in April of 91 together. And by the end of 91, we were playing the New Year's Eve show with Native Tongues at Respectable Street. So it was like this whirlwind for us of like, we went from playing we literally played in an asphalt paving company warehouse to, 8 months later, we're playing New Year's Eve at Respectable Streets. And it was just like, what is happening here? So
did you guys have other shows up until that point at Respectable Street, or was that the first gig you had there?
That was my first gig at Respectable Street. So it was, like this, we had reached, the mountain at our first time at Respectable Street. So it was thanks to Rodney Mayo and probably Steve Ruhlman at that point that they were doing something local and letting people play New Year's Eve at the best club in town. And we got picked. So it was like, that was our first show at Respectable Streets. And yeah, we played there many, many times after that and with, the next band. But that was the first one, and it was just like, oh gosh, we're rock stars at this point.
How did you guys continue to kind of build that relationship with Respectable Street to continue to play there as many times as your bands have?
I think again, a lot of it was people liked what we were doing at the time. Um, I always, even from the beginning, took it very serious. I had quit drinking in 1990, so I took it as, we're a band, we show up on time, we play, we're not the replacements. We're not going to show up and you're drunk one time and you're sober one time and it's the greatest show in the world and the worst show you ever seen, which was also the greatest show you'd ever seen at the same time. I took it as like, if they said be there at 7 and you're doing sound check and you're going to play, is like, we took it very professionally. And I think the idea that we showed up, we always put on a great show. A lot of people would come to see us, and, we weren't screw ups and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people just liked our attitude and our work ethic, and dug the band enough that they, didn't get tired of hearing our music. And so we were blessed.
Who do you think some of your biggest cheerleaders were back then? Like whether they were other people in the scene or family, friends, like who was really, really behind you guys, you feel like the most?
Well, I'll give the most to my mother always. My mother supported us at every chance she could. She showed up at a bunch of shows, which some people laughed at or thought was goofy, but she loved music and she loved seeing her son play. So she was my biggest supporter always. But beyond that, we had a great group of buddies that we went to high school with, and guys I grew up with and they grew up with at the time. And some local dudes like, Kevin Seeley and a bunch of guys that, I'd have to, say thanks to. But we got along with a lot of other bands. We liked a lot of other bands. So, to me, it was never a competition. And, so I went and saw everyone as much as I could and invited everyone to our stuff. So we had a great group of friends. And even though it was, such a small scene at the time, that once people hear things, even if you're a nobody band in West Palm Beach, people would come out and see you at that time. There wasn't a lot to do, in 1990, 91, 92. So it seemed like people wanted to go out to clubs and see. And if there was a band there, for me, even better, for them, even better. So great group of friends, great group of people we met along the way, great group of bands that helped support us, and we tried to support them as well.
What do you remember about the formation of One Dog's Opinion? When did that band start?
One Dog's Opinion. Hooded Woodies had split up, and our bass player started playing with this other little surf band, and I can't even remember their name, and I apologize to those guys, but he started playing, and they did a show at Abaco's. And so I went there with the drummer from Hooded Woodies, and we were watching the bass player and ran into some guys, and it was like then of like, well, why are we sitting around doing nothing? These guys sound great and they're kicking ass, and everybody's having fun. It was like, why don't we start playing again? So I actually got together with a couple of guys, Gary Messick and Matt Berger, who played in some bands around. Gary was a good friend with the Holy Terrors, who I had run into and was just in awe of those guys. And so I knew he was a singer-songwriter. So we actually started a band together called Cracked Actor, named after a David Bowie song. Matt Berger was a big David Bowie guy. That band was kind of fizzling out, so I started jamming with the Hooded Woody guys again, and then invited my old buddy Rob Shawnenaw that I went to high school with and played in our first bands. We started jamming around and called it Soylent Green. And we played like one show, and the bass player left. We got a new bass player, and I said, you know what, I'm going to change the name at this point. I don't want to be affiliated with that. So at that point, I said, I got this name, One Dog's Opinion. So 1993, just as the first Bill Cord Resident Noise tape was coming out, Steve Ruhlman asked if we would submit a song. And so One Dog's Opinion was actually formed from splitting off of a guy leaving and me going, I'm going to change the name. We're going to be fresh. So One Dog's Opinion started in 93. That's how we came about.
How'd you get the name? Where'd it come from?
The name actually came from the girl I was dating at the time had this VHS video book. And it was like, this is how far back it is. It was a rating book. And it was, he had dog bones as the rating, 1 bone, 2 bone, 3 bone. And he named that ranking system that he had One Dog's Opinion. And I saw that in print and just thought, that's an awesome name. And I don't know if you've ever been in a band or not, but if you've sat down with 3 and 4 people trying to figure out a band name and everyone's coming up with 17,000 things that suck or just are horrible, and you're just going. So I saw this thing that said One Dog's Opinion, and I was like, well, that's all it ever is. So I came in and was like, I got this name. It's going to be One Dog's Opinion. And everyone laughed and thought it was great and went, that's where One Dog's Opinion came from.
Have you ever told that story before?
I've told it to people, but I don't think it's ever been in print or, in any kind of history thing.
I don't think I read it anywhere. So I'm glad you cleared that up where the name came
Yes,
from.
you were the first official person who's going to actually know that. I think it was like the Hound Dog's video guide to movies or something. That's where the name came from.
Nice. Very cool. So now that you have this new band, right? And what is the direction? Because you were with Hooded Woodies, did some other stuff kind of in between for a little bit. Was there a shift for you, or was it just a kind of continuation? What was your mindset as you were starting One Dog's Opinion?
Well, at that point, Hooded Woodies was a 3-piece, and now One Dog's Opinion was a 4-piece. So that kind of opened up my world, and you'll hear on that live tape that I send you, that to me opened up a world because I wasn't the only guitar player now. And I was never a super great lead guitar player. I was always more of a rhythm guitar player, kind of songwriter kind of guy. But adding now was this 4th, member, another guitar player. It started really kind of changing my style a little bit. It opened up. It was still kind of in that vein of rock with a little punk influence, a little less punk, a little more straight up rock, but it was kind of, fast driving rock. So it still had that punk edge, but it went in that same kind of vein of what I had been doing and kind of that rock punk mix. But that changed when that version of One Dog's Opinion, it's so funny because we did that show at Respectables and we opened up for Jack Off Jill and we recorded it, and the guy doing their thing recorded it for us, and we had this tape and it was like great, and it was like, wow, we've got this thing. And the bass player quit right after that show and everything broke up for like a year. I didn't play another show after that gig, and it was like, what the heck? So again, we were kind of spinning wheels. That's when I met Jonathan Dale, who became the drummer of the next version of One Dog's Opinion. And we went back to a 3-piece. And our first night practicing, he was like, well, what do you want to do? And it's like, it's always a pain in the ass when you're trying to go, well, here, I've got this song. Let's learn this song as you're sitting here. It's like, that's not fun. I just said, I've got this little riff I've been working with. And even way back as far as 86, I had been doing kind of this cowpunk thing where, that whole, cowpunk from back in the 80s, Texas bands, and, those bands were mixing punk and kind of they grew up on country, and then punk moved in. So playing shuffle beats and stuff with, punk attitude. So I started playing this riff that became the first song on the album, Ghost Town. And I started playing it, and he kicked into this shuffle beat right with me. And it was like this light bulb went off. And I was like, this is my new drummer. Mike McGuire was the greatest rock drummer I had played with. And then I hit Jonathan Dale, and it opened up this whole thing because everyone I knew tried to play that shuffle beat. But you play that for a minute and you start tripping over yourself and you sound like a drummer going down the stairs. And it's just tough to play that beat. And he could play it because he grew up in Texas and was playing in Austin and all these bands. And he played that shuffle beat, and I just was like, that the light went off and was like, this is the guy. That's when a whole real shift of music for me and One Dog's Opinion was like, okay, you've opened a whole nother door, and now we can do all this stuff plus this new thing.
Right. And you had people who already came out and saw the other iteration of the band. So when you guys got back out there and there's this different element now of the band, what was the reaction like?
Um, I'm gonna say people liked it. I mean, no one ever said anything to us, especially at the time. Nobody at that moment in West Palm Beach that I knew of really, maybe something was going on down south, but no one was really doing kind of that alternative country. I called it cowpunk. I mean, I was into the Rank and File and X and the Knitters and the Blasters and the Alvin Brothers long before it became alternative country, when Wilco and Old 97s and all those kind of guys were popping up later. So no one was really kind of doing that thing in the scene that I was aware of. Charlie Pickett back in the day and some of those guys down in Miami, but no one was really mixing a kind of country and rock and punk thing together. So it seemed to kind of catch hold. And then I formally met Gino from Shrill and the Roids. I bumped, into him over the years and knew of the Roids and stuff. And then I formally met him when he was in Shrill. And of course, they were doing that kind of redneck rock thing, AC/DC mixed with, kind of Super Suckers kind of thing. And so we were a little more country. They were more redneck rock, but they were the only ones doing it. So when I met them at that point, that was like, oh, we've got brothers on the scene. So we really connected and started playing a lot of shows together. And he was actually the guy that introduced us to Jeremy Staska at Studio 13 and was like, you guys got to go and record. And this is the guy to do it. So he opened up a whole new world of musicians and clubs and going into a studio for the first time.
Was that where No Gus, No Glory was recorded at Studio 13?
Absolutely. And so was I Will Name You Roy. So both of them were done there. And that was amazing. And everybody that was anybody at the time was doing Studio 13. Jeremy Staska was like the god, a little warehouse in the middle of nowhere, but you walked in. And our first album, No Guts, was actually recorded on audio tape, like a 1.5 inch or 2 inch tape or something. So that was the technology at the time. He was still recording on tape. So you had to get everything right at that point. And then that was 98. And then we went in and, no, actually that was 97. We recorded that. And then we went in 98 and he had Pro Tools Cakewalk at that point. So he'd gone digital in the next year. So that was a whole new level of, well, now we can take things out and we can add things in and we can, your mistake there, we can just move. It was like, whoa, but he was the master. And meeting Jeremy Staska was like, everybody recorded with him. So that gave us street cred that we couldn't get anywhere else, just, thanks to Gino. But, Jeremy Staska was the guy.
What was the vibe like in the studios? I've had people come on who've recorded at Studio 13. Everyone has different stories about what it was like in the various periods at the studio. So what was it like for you and the other guys in the band?
Oh, well, for me, it was fantastic because Jeremy was, a little pothead. So, he liked to smoke. So for me, that was right up my alley. For Jonathan, the drummer, he was not that, but the atmosphere itself was so professional and being with somebody for me for the first time who had a shit together and wasn't like, oh, there's this buzz and he's tripping over stuff and blah, 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 blah. It was just laid back. He knew what he was doing. You went in. The trickiest thing for us is he liked to do it all live while you're in the same room. but you recorded the bass guitar and the drums at the same time, but no vocals. So there were no pre-tracks going in. We didn't lay down something and then you go back and you play to it. Like, the drummer was playing to a guitar. We just stood in the room together and I mouthed everything to them as we did. And, we'd be like, 1, 2, 3, and we'd start playing and I would be sitting there going, and change, but couldn't say it because everything's mic. So I'm just sitting there going, so we're playing everything live without vocals. And you really have to have your stuff together and you really have to know where you're at and the songs. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting going, oh, that was the change there, or, whatever. So it got that raw sound, but he was a master. It was laid back. He was a super chill guy. He was a better musician on the drums, guitar, and bass than all of us put together. So it was a little intimidating having, that, playing in front of him. And we were a little different for him because he was doing a lot of heavier stuff and more intricate stuff. And we were more of a simple rock band. But he dug us. But I loved the atmosphere. I loved, he brought some killer stuff in, and we'd sit in the booth together and, cloud up the room and just had a blast.
Nice. Well, as you were finished with that recording, No Guts, No Glory, did you start playing out a lot of those songs? Like, were those like in the set list, or what were some of the gigs like after that album came out?
Yeah, we had been playing those songs already for a while, and we were actually starting to play some songs that ended up on I Will Name You Roy. It's just we had such limited money, and he charged by the hour, that we bought one roll of tape. And we went in and recorded exactly 8 songs because that's what fit on that roll of tape. And the album could have had more songs, but we just went, that's all it is. And that's all the money we have. And we recorded every song in one night. We came back the next night and I did all the overdubs and the vocals. And we came back the next night and mixed it. And we were done in probably 15 hours for the entire album, start to finish. So we had already been playing those songs and new songs at that point, but that's all we could get on a tape. So we went out, we did a CD release party at Soundsplash in West Palm Beach, thanks to Matt Reynolds at that point. And so, yeah, we were playing those songs before the CD came out and after the CD, and then we were already incorporating new songs by the time people had even heard the song, the album.
Wasn't Soundsplash like a music store?
Yeah, it was a used record and tape store like that off Okeechobee or old Okeechobee back in the day. So, he was a big supporter of local music, and we practiced in these warehouses right there off old Okeechobee, right behind there. Happy Days was there, and Soundsplash. So we recorded right back there, and number 13. So it was our lucky number back in the day. We didn't know if it was an omen or a good sign, but they stuck us at number 13. Right. So this is it. So yeah, so Soundsplash was a cool place to hang out for musicians.
Were you at all going to any shows, whether it was like in north of you, whether it was like Fort Pierce or Melbourne, Orlando, that sort of thing?
Yeah. At that point, we would travel up to Gainesville, Orlando, even Tampa to go see stuff. And back in the day, we'd even drive up to Atlanta, to go see bands that were coming around. But yeah, we would travel around the state to see other bands, especially big bands for sure. Because you'd only, like I said, you'd only get Miami. That was usually your one shot if they were coming south. Otherwise, Orlando, Tampa, Gainesville, Jacksonville, you had to go there to see bands. So absolutely.
You remember some of the places you were going to see some of those bands in other parts of the state?
All I remember, I remember going to the place that was actually at the University of Gainesville, but I don't remember. It was like that, the place that was at the university, but there was a place in Gainesville. It was called the Book End or the Book something in Gainesville. Would see some shows, But yeah, I don't really remember a lot of names from back then, exactly where we went, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And as you were going up though and exploring more of the state, did you at all run across any other people along the way who were in local bands, or maybe you saw a local band? Anything come to mind from that time?
Um, Gainesville probably would have been the only place. I dated a girl who went to school up there for a while, so I'd go up there like every other weekend so often and saw a lot of really cool bands. I don't really remember all of them at all at this point because this would have been like right around 1990. But a lot of cool bands, in Gainesville, just because of being a college town, of course. But um, names, I wish I did. I wish I was better at that. But just saw whoever was playing up there, in
Sure.
the school bands, really.
Right. Yeah. So when you were finished up with that first album, you had the CD release party at Soundsplash. And what was the reaction like? Were you guys selling a lot of the CDs? What was that experience like for you, and perhaps even some of the other guys in the band back in that period?
Yeah, I mean, it did really well. I mean, of course, I didn't do it to make any money because I don't think we made any money. But it was great. It got us a bunch of shows. It was able for us to be able to hand people things because we never really had anything to be able to go, like, here's a demo tape or whatever. We would actually, burn off some songs and do a few songs to hand to people or just hand them CDs. But it opened up a new world as far as getting gigs for us and people being able to physically have something and go, wow, now I can play, One Dog's Opinion in my car. This is like, amazing. And so it was a big help for us and, just a huge personal goal. And I think for them as well. Jonathan, the drummer, he had played in Texas and then lived in New York City for a couple of years and played in a couple bands. And so he was on to this studio thing and had some CDs. So for him, it was just an extension of the rest of his career. But for Rob and myself, it was like the first, like, what, we've got a CD in our hand. It's like, who does that? I mean, only rock, real bands do this. I never thought local bands could have it. But so it was just a game changer for us of getting gigs and building our scene a little bit and just getting gigs and it was just like a dream to be able to actually do it. So it was huge for me and the guys in the band for sure.
Yeah. Who was Trailer Park Records? That's who put out the CD.
Well, Trailer Park Records was actually One Dog's Opinion and Shrill put together. And so we got together and wanted to do like our own label. And at one point we were thinking about doing other people, but so Trailer Park Records was One Dogs and Shrill together, putting out our music on this label.
And then when the second album came out, it was also released on the same label, but there's not a ton that's actually listed under that label. Was there any other intention to do more of it, or perhaps there was, and maybe it's just not found anywhere? Was there a lot of stuff on the label?
No, it turned out to be two One Dogs albums, and I think Shrill maybe did two things on it. There was an idea of getting other local bands and some things that we liked and kind of chipping in money and booking things at Studio 13 and hoping to start like a little bit of a label. But it really just, by the time One Dogs came around and we wanted to start our third album, like I already had like a potential name for it. We were doing all this stuff. At that point, the band was starting to go its own way, and I think Shrill, a drummer was leaving, and some people were doing their own things, and so it was kind of like One Dog's third album that never happened. I still call it the long-awaited third album that nobody wanted. was there and and we were getting ready, and I was going to call it belly up to the trough, and we were getting ready, and it just the band, people were getting married, and people were having kids, and people were starting to move away and get real jobs, and so Trailer Park Records just kind of faded out, and we never really did anything past One Dogs and Shrill, unfortunately.
The second album, I Will Name You Roy. I know you mentioned Gino's name, but before. Now,
Yeah.
Gino actually played on that record. He played guitar. Is that right?
Yeah, he did come in and play guitar, and JC Dwyer, who was the singer for Shrill, I talked him into after a gig one night. I said, "You got to call my answering machine, and I just want you to put all this crazy yelling and screaming and doing all this stuff." So he called my house, and you can hear it on one point. You hear the thing go beep like 1:30 a.m. in the morning, and JC's yelling and screaming and doing all of his best, David Lee Roth imitations. So I used it, and Gino came up and played guitar on Fumble Cracker. Gino actually came up with that name because the original title of the song was Florida Cracker. And Gino, always being Gino, kind of laughed at me and said, "What, Fumble Cracker?" And I was like, "What the hell is Fumble Cracker?" So I changed the name of the song just because it was so weird, and Gino said it. But yeah, he actually played guitar on Fumble Cracker, and the yelling and screaming and all this craziness at the end of the song is J.C. Dwyer from Shrill and Gone Mad and Rape Tape and all those bands. So I stuck him on the end, and Gino came up to the studio and played guitar for us. So
Nice.
yeah, yeah. He's a good friend. He's a good buddy. So, and we even worked together up here in Tennessee for 15 years together up until just recently. So
I was going to ask because Gino's up in Tennessee as well. So I was curious if you guys were close in proximity.
yeah. I ended up. I knew obviously he had moved here, and then I ended up moving here, but I had no idea where he lived. And so when I did get here, I said, "Hey, I moved here, and this is where I'm at." And he's like, "Holy shit, you're like 25 miles from me." And I was like, "Oh, this is awesome." So we reconnected and started hanging out. And then I started working with them at this company. And we worked together for 15 years. So up until January, we worked together for the last 15 years.
Wow. Okay.
And so, yeah, we're still great buddies, and we live not that far from each other. And I try to go see Creeping Crud's his current band as much as I can. But yeah, we're still great friends and still hang out, and I still support him as often as possible.
And the story of the Roids is one of the most popular episodes on the channel. A lot of people really, really love that episode because there wasn't a whole lot that you can go out and find about the Roids. So having Gino on to tell the story was really amazing to document that. Did you ever get a chance to see the Roids back when they were active?
I did see the Royds back when they were active. I didn't really know them back then. Like I said, I crossed paths with him. I knew who he was, but I did see the Royds. But the Royds, as anyone will tell you, I mean, there was nobody, and then there was the Royds. It's kind of like, like Genesis, in the Bible. I mean, there were people that were older than us that, were playing, but for us, it was like, okay, the Royds beget, and so the Royds were like it. They were rock stars in West Palm Beach and Palm Beach County when nobody was a rock star, in Palm Beach County. Nobody in my circle. So yeah, Gino was like, the hallowed grounds of like, whoa, he's in the Roids. And I didn't really know anybody else till later. And like I said, I didn't really even know Gino. I just knew of him. And he knew my brother because my brother worked at the record store. So he knew all the bands. So I was blessed to. I didn't see Husker Du, but I did see the Roids back in the day.
There you go. Redemption.
Exactly. So yeah, so I was blessed to see them, and they were like, they started stuff that everybody followed the Roids after that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was really glad to get Gino on to tell the story. And very cool to hear your perspective as well, because being from Palm Beach, you not only had a chance to see the Royds, but Gino played on the record too. So And when you guys put out I Will Name You Roy, this being now the second album in the catalog, right? Was there any shift in the kind of gigs you were taking on? Was it heating up? Was it kind of slowing down? What was it like when that record came out?
We were really kind of rolling at that point. The first album come out, we recorded that one in July 97. We did Roy in November 98. So it's just been like a year later, basically. We were kicking butt at that time. I think Jake Klein at that point and City Link had somewhere along the line, I can't remember exactly, but he had named it as like one of the best, local albums of that year. And so that album got us the closing gig at City Link Music Festival as the last band to play. And then subsequently we played like two more City Link things. So that album really even opened up more kind of windows and doors for us. And to me, it was really more of what I was going for, because No Guts was some holdover music from previous bands. And I was really trying to get into this new kind of style. And then that's when Jonathan came in. But we had already had these songs from prior bands and things I had written. So No Guts was sort of a old songs, just starting to get into new songs. And then Roy was like, this is this band now. These are all songs that were written as us, as this three-piece. So, and it kind of, at the time, kick-started a whole new thing, because now people were seeing as this. We had like two kind of country punk songs on No Guts, and then a lot more theme of that on Roy. And so that kind of opened up a whole new thing of people going, oh, okay. And now you've got this sound, because we leaned a little more into it at that point. So, and it was such enough of a dynamic shift that people weren't going, oh, it's the same album they just put out. It sounds like that album that they just did. It was enough of a shift that people were like, whoa, okay, these guys aren't sitting still and resting on their laurels and it's got the same songs and the same thing. So it kickstarted a whole new movement. Now people were going, oh, you're alternative country. And they hated me because I always just went, no, we're a rock and roll band. It's like, there's no labels here, because we play ballads and we play country and we play punk and we play rock. So, and that in itself caused a little trouble, because we weren't country enough, we weren't punk enough, we weren't rock enough, so where do you stick us in this circle of bands and this scene? So, but I didn't care. I just showed up, turned it to 11 and went, who are we playing with?
I agree though, because I think it was tough to label you guys because of the sound. You didn't really know what to call it, because it was a little bit of everything. It was alternative, it was some punk, it was some country, it was a little bit of everything. And I kind of like that sound that you guys had, and also the artwork.
Yes.
The artwork of I Will Name You Roy. I felt like when I first picked up that CD, I can't remember where I got it when I first had it. The lime green color was just, it stood out. And then the old guy on the cart or whatever he's riding, or I don't know what you call that. Was that a real person that you guys knew? Like,
Yes, I actually took that picture. That guy's name was Connor, and he always hung out at the farmer's market out there on Congress Avenue. And I was driving down the road one day, and Connor was coming down the street on that little cart. And I pulled over. We always called him Connor the Cowboy, because he always dressed in the hat and the bolo tie. And he's on that little scooter with the horse attached to it. And I think it even said cowboy on the front. And I stopped and I was like, I need to take your picture. I'm going to put you on the front of our new album. And of course, he was just like, whatever, man, just do it. So that was actually a guy who lived in West Palm Beach. His name was Connor. And I took that picture myself. And the name of the album came from a completely different thing. There used to be a thing back in the 90s on MTV, and they used to do these weird little skits. And there was this one comedian that would do these weird things. And at this one point, he came on and he was dressed all in S&M, black leather. And he was standing there with this bighorn sheep, this goat. And he turns to the goat and he says, "I will name you Roy, and together we will rule the," and he stops and goes, "What?" And so for me, for some reason, this name of "I will name you Roy" stuck in my head for years. So when we came around, there was this picture of Connor, and I was like, we're throwing him on the cover, and we're going to call it "I Will Name You Roy." And everyone just went, "What the does that mean?" And it was like, exactly. What does it mean? Nobody could figure out what it means and where we got it from, but "I Will Name You Roy" and Connor is a real guy, and I actually took that picture of him. Yeah, unfortunately for him, a couple years right after that, he tried to cross Congress Avenue, was hit by a car, and yeah, it killed him. So yeah, unfortunately, Connor didn't last much after that, but he will forever be, live in infamy on the cover of One Dog's Opinion album.
You enshrined him on the cover, so
absolutely. And I think in the liner notes we actually thanked him, Connor the Cowboy.
Did. The album is dedicated to Connor the Cowboy. And,
absolutely. So we thanked him for that and gave him, front billing on the album, and came up with lime green because it's one of my favorite colors. So, and we thought it would stand out, and just, that's it. "I Will Name You Roy" on lime green and a picture of him. And Gino actually came up with the logo as it was, as the official one. Gino used to always do their own flyers, and he's a great, drawer and pensman. So he actually did the logo as it was, and we kept it. And that became our official logo. So Gino from the Roids and the Shrill was the actual one who drew that out, and we kept it as the official thing from that point going on. So thank you.
I was looking to see if that was listed anywhere, and I didn't see it. So that's good to know that Gino was the one responsible for the logo of the band.
Yep, he was the one who drew out the letters and the sizes and everything. And I just went, what else do we need? That's our one. I think it ended up being on a flyer, and I just was like, dude, that's perfect. So we're incorporating that as our. There you go. So Gino had a big influence on a lot of things that ended up happening with One Dog's Opinion. So always forever indebted to him as well.
That's very interesting. And speaking about flyers, I appreciate all the flyers you shared. Are those a lot that you archived yourself, or like, because you have a pretty good batch of flyers out there? So were you archiving a lot back then?
Absolutely. I kept like everything. I don't know why well, I guess maybe as like anybody, is like, one day we're going to be famous, and this first flyer is going to be, important to somebody, or this 10th flyer. So I just threw everything in a drawer, starting way back at Hooded Woodies, and it all just ended up in this place. And then one day I broke it out and just started taking pictures of everything so I could post it on Facebook, probably MySpace originally, but Facebook was just like, because I did a One Dog's Opinion page. So yeah, I still have like tons of flyers and promotional stuff, and just about everything that I ever knew we were on or we made, I have a copy of.
One of my favorite flyers is the one with Jack LaLanne on it from Respectables. It was, the bill was Doorway 27, One Dog's Opinion, Al's Not Well, The Holy Terrors, Idols, and Others. So I know some of those bands, the Doorway, Al, and Holy Terrors. So what do you remember from that show?
I don't remember Idols and Others at all, to be honest with you. Super fan of the Holy Terrors, and I had seen Al's Not Well down in Lauderdale or Miami somewhere, and just, they blew me away at that point. So I was new to them, but I was like, oh, I'm throwing this show together. And I was speaking to the girl at the time that was the singer. So I was dealing with her, and I was like, you girls got to come up here, because I think there were 2 girls in the band. I was like, you've got to come up and play this show. And Doorway 27 being a local band, I was a big fan of them, and I knew Brian. and his eventual wife, Melissa, she was a promoter in West Palm and a big fan of One Dog's Opinion. So I was like, Doorway's got to be on there. And I talked Holy Terrors to coming in because they were good friends and still are good friends. Chat with Rob all the time. So I just wanted to get like this band of heavy hitters and go, let's get like these badasses together and let's do this. And of course, anytime you played on a bill with Holy Terrors, you just kind of went, we're playing before you and getting off the stage and getting out of the way. But I just remember just being a kick-ass show. I actually have a recording of that.
Oh, wow.
At least of us playing. I'm not sure if everybody else playing, but I have a recording from that night as well that I just dug up, and I'm going to see how that is, because there's some songs on there that are only recorded from practices that were going to make it to the next album that never happened. So I've got to get that one out but that was a killer show. And then we ended up doing a couple of Moonfest and Respectable's anniversaries. So we played with a lot of amazing bands back in the day, and blessed. And of course, the Holy Terrors, to me, they were the band. I'm sure you've heard that from a lot of people, potentially from South Florida, that when I saw them, it was just like, okay, we'll always be second to the Holy Terrors, but I'm okay with that. And it's a funny little story about meeting those guys. Is I went down to Miami Beach one night, like on a Wednesday or a Thursday, to this new place called the Warehouse. And it was literally a warehouse that someone had turned into this club. And it was one of those places you knew in 6 months it wasn't going to be open anymore. So went down there, and it was like an open mic night, and a couple bands were playing. And nobody was standing out at all. And then these four guys walked up, and they were in like jeans and like Izod shirts and a couple of things. And, it's 1991 early. And, I was, be honest, I was kind of like, look at these guys, what is this going to sound like? Kind of like a nerd rock, what's this going to be? And they got up and played, and it was just like, holy mackerel, Andy, there's a local band that's this good. There were some bands that were good, but it was like, holy Christ almighty. So when they came off the stage, it was just like, I have to meet these guys. And I talked to them and told Sam back in the day, I was like, man, if I had a drummer like you, I'd be in the best band in the world. No, dissing Kevin Turner, my current member, but just going like, holy crap. So from that point on, Dan Hosker and I, rest in peace, we became friends because we were guitar players. So we hung out a little bit enough, and I went to every show that I could see of those guys and became friends with them. And so I tried to get on a bill with them, or, get them on a bill with us. I mean, way back, there's a flyer I sent you that at Washington Square, Hooded Woodies played with Load and Holy Terrors, and the Wahoos, which became C60, which Will from that band ends up joining the Holy Terrors. So that was like, getting to play with Load and Holy Terrors back in 91, 92 was just like, some of the early stuff was, again, like, man, we were blessed to play with some of these bands back in the day, Livid Kittens, and we even played with Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids at one show way back in the day when they were still carrying lunchboxes and dressing up like, Dr. Seuss and Cat in the Hat and stuff. And they weren't as scary as they became. But so way back then, we were blessed to be early in the 90s and get to see a lot of cool stuff.
Definitely sounds like you play with a lot of different bands, almost a who's who of who was out doing their thing back in the 90s. What was some of the differences for you? Perhaps playing in Palm Beach, then maybe playing in Broward, or then playing in Miami. What was the difference for you, maybe playing some of the different cities in South Florida?
Well, to me, the biggest difference always is seeing down in Broward and Dade County down in Miami that you could go see a band, and the drummer was the drummer in this band, but he was the guitar player in this band, and he was the bass player in that band, which Palm Beach County, in my experience, was much more cut off. It was much more you played in this band and you played in that band. And when that band split up, you got another band, or there wasn't a whole lot of, we all supported each other, but it wasn't like, like I said, this guy played in that band and that band and that band, where those scenes seemed like there were more clubs to play. There was more support down there. And everybody was like, oh, I'll be the bass in your band. I'll sing in that band. I'll drum in this band. So it reminded me more of cities like Charlotte or Orlando or New York, where you were in a scene as you knew everybody and you played with everybody. In Palm Beach, it was more just like you played in bands together with each other on bills, but not so much you were, doing 10 things. Where that scene just seemed like it was much more like a family, and like you would play the bass and drums in different bands. But Palm Beach was a little more, you were in a band and they were in a band, and then you just start a new band. So I saw that as more of like a big city scene than say West Palm Beach was. And to me, and no disrespect for anybody, but I always looked at, people were trying to be big fish, in a small pond, and going like, I'm the king of West Palm Beach. And it was like, what does that even mean? It's West Palm Beach. It's like, just, I supported everybody, and a lot of people supported each other, but there were the bands that were like, we're going to be kings of the scene. And it was like, whatever, man. So that was my difference personally with Palm Beach versus like Broward and Dade County.
Right. And that's fair. Did you guys ever have any desire to do any touring outside of what would be considered like South Florida? Like, did you go up north at all, any other parts of the state or outside of Florida?
It was weird. It was just, I always wanted to, but we all had day jobs. I owned a home way back in the day, so I had mortgage and bills to pay, and so going on the road meant, that was money out of our pocket. So it was weird that we never really did that kind of travel. And it was like, not a lot of bands, especially in Palm Beach County that I was aware, West Palm Beach, did it. I mean, you may go up and play a Tampa show, or you may go up and do a Gainesville show, but people didn't really go on the road for weeks at a time and take off and stuff. I hate looking back now that we didn't do it. I would have loved to have gone out and done some shows and just, been out there in front of different people in a different scene, if they liked it or not, just to do it. But we just never did. I don't know why. I hate that we didn't, but I wish we did.
I can understand that, especially, looking back. Yeah, I mean, the could have, should have, would have, but you guys have played a ton of shows down in
Yes.
South Florida. Uh, the amount of shows you guys played and with all the different bands you played with, I was kind of surprised, and maybe you can shed some light on this, Bobby. Uh, I was surprised you guys never got signed by one of the bigger labels, especially I feel like in the 90s, there were a lot of South Florida bands that were getting signed at that time. Any memories of that, and perhaps maybe what may have happened, or perhaps any stories around that?
I mean, yeah, there were a lot of bands at that time. Nuclear Valdez and Marilyn Manson were all going, and we were opening for Jack Off Jill, who were produced by Marilyn Manson. We sent a ton of stuff out to every little small label, big label, everything. And it just, for whatever reason, never got a hold, never grabbed, anybody's attention. There was a label out of California at one point that was interested in us doing on some Johnny Cash compilation. And because we had that kind of sound, and they spoke to us for a while, but I sent a ton of stuff out to people, and we played a bunch of shows. I mean, we got turned down for South by Southwest year after year and never even got invited to play out there. And I knew some bands that ended up from South Florida getting to go out there. And it was like, good for them. But we, for whatever reason, it was just nobody dug it enough, or liked it enough, or cared enough, or whatever. But I sent it everywhere and we tried things and we opened up for a few people, but it just never went beyond where we were for whatever reason.
Yeah. And that's disappointing. And did you guys have, I mean, with all that, did that have any impact on the tenure of the band? Like, did it kind of take the wind out of your sails at all? Or were you guys like, you know what, we're going to do this no matter what?
Yeah, I don't think it did. I think if anything, like most people, it made us just go, screw you. When we get up on stage, we're going to kick ass and take names and go home. And you may not like the music, but you cannot say that band didn't get up there and rock. Like, I took it as, as a challenge of like, okay, well, cool. Then we're going to show you why we're playing these shows and why people are booking us and, why we're blessed to get to play with all these bands because I took it serious, I wasn't that serious that it was like, this militant thing, but it was just to me, I couldn't stand when I saw bands come up and they half-assed it or they didn't sound like the record or whatever. And it was like, what? That didn't sound like them. I
Right.
was like, we recorded the album live. This is what we sound like. And this is what we're going to sound like when you hear us on stage. So it motivated me more than anything. But it was disappointing that nothing really ever, moved beyond our small little circle and our small scene. But it wasn't going to stop me by any means, for sure.
Sure. What kind of support did you guys get from local radio at that time?
Um, Almost none, almost zero. Thank God for Steve Ruhlman. He had that pirate radio back in the day, and he played some stuff, and we got on there. Steve was a big supporter of ours, so I'll shout him out. So he helped us. But other than that, I mean, we did one thing on the Buzz when they were doing this for a while. They were doing a local thing where they dragged local bands in on a Thursday morning or something, and you got to play a song acoustically, and then they sat and talked to you for 5 or 10 minutes. That was the extent of it. We are probably, I always laughed, we are probably the least documented band in history. It's like there are no videos, there's hardly any photos, there was no, radio things. It's like there's this myth and a legend of One Dog's Opinion, but it's hard to find it. But no support really locally, other than a few key players that bless them. It was weird.
Well, I think that will change now that we're doing this episode and documenting a lot of these experiences and things that maybe people never knew. People who may have been going to shows, maybe never saw you guys play. But I remember seeing One Dog's Opinion come up all the time on Steve's when he first started the Honeycomb and
Yes.
the honeycomb.net, I think it was.
Yep.
And I would always see One Dog's Opinion playing all the time. It felt like it was like probably once or twice a week. That was at least my memory of it. It may not have been that much, but you guys were playing all the time. So that
Absolutely.
and because of that time period, right? We're talking the internet was obviously becoming more of a place where you can learn about a show. It wasn't just going to a record store, getting a flyer or word of mouth. So what was that like for you kind of coming up in that where now you have this thing called the internet that is this driving force with spreading the word to get people out to some of those shows?
Oh yeah, I mean it was a game changer for everybody. Like you said, originally it was literally you went to places and asked if you could put flyers on their counter or stick them on telephone poles downtown or whatever. And then when it became like, oh my God, you don't have to pick up a phone and call everybody. You could actually book some shows, especially even out of town. So it was a game changer that way. And I wish kind of when that really took off is when the band started slowing down, into the 2000s. So we really kind of were fizzling out when people really learned like what you could do with the internet. So if we would have been a few more years, it would have been even better for us. But yeah, it was awesome to be able to go, oh, well, now there's places where like the Honeycomb and things like that, where you could find it without having to go get CityLink or a newspaper or, whatever local thing was printing things. But yeah, I mean, we played all the time, everywhere, anybody that would allow us. If it was a Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, we didn't care. We didn't care who was on the bill. We loved playing, and it got our name out there. So yeah, you probably at one point literally saw every week or every other week that One Dog's Opinion was somewhere.
It certainly felt that way.
Yeah, me too.
So, was there ever a show that came up, perhaps with a band that was coming in from out of town, that you guys really wanted to open up for, but for whatever reason it didn't happen? Did any of those experiences ever occur?
Yeah, there were two that I'm definitely aware of. Well, three, actually, I think about it. Dick Dale was playing at Respectable Street. And I thought, as for the bands that were playing around, nobody really fit that surf style. But we were probably the closest thing in his universe. And we didn't get that gig. And it was like, I can't remember who got it, but bless them. But it was like, damn, I wanted that one. And there was a gig where Santana was coming in and playing out at the Coral Sky or whatever it was called at that point, the amphitheater out there. And they were looking for bands to play the side stage. And they called our number, and it went to all of our, answering machines back then. And they were like, whoever the first band that picks up this phone is the band that's coming. And we were early on the list, and of course we were all at work, so no one got it. So we missed out on playing for them. And then I forget his name. Is it Jonathan Richman? The guy from the Modern Lovers and, something about Mary was out. He was coming through doing a solo thing. And I thought, we're off the beaten path compared to everybody else. We were what Rob would always say was like, we were the true alternative. Everybody sounded like, what was happening on the radio. So One Dog's, in his opinion, was like, if you look up the definition of alternative, it's us. So we always thought we should get these quirky guys, and we didn't get that show either. But we did get to open for Nashville Pussy, and we did get to open for Southern Culture on the Skids. And that was like the two big bands that we opened for. And that was the only gigs we ever got, kind of like that. So we were the bastard childs of West Palm Beach, the black sheep. But we just kept going and sticking it in their face, so they didn't have a choice. So
right. Southern Culture and Nashville Pussy are two pretty solid bands to share the stage with. Was that at Respectable Street?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So that was awesome for us, for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I'm just thinking about maybe the show that just drew the most, the best crowd. Any one or two shows come to mind?
Yeah, we did a Clematis show. I'm not sure if it was Moonfest or if they were doing that Clematis by Night thing. And so we played out on Clematis down on what would be the west end towards Respectables, and blessed that, it was a show put up by probably Rodney Mayo. And it was just as far as the eye could see down Clematis. So it was thousands of people that night. It was just incredible. We did a couple of Moonfest. We did a couple of Respectable anniversaries, and one of those was out on the street as well. And of course, we did CityLink, and we closed that show. That was at the Chili Pepper, an outside stage at the Chili Pepper. So seemed like there was 100,000 people, but there was probably 1,000 people. But to us, those were definitely memorable. Like, holy shit, this is more than the usual 50 people at a bar on a Thursday that you're used to, kind of thing. So those were big ones for us. And we did a couple of things at the Chili Pepper prior to that, and some benefit shows for things that a lot of people. But CityLink Music Festival, Clematis by Night, and Respectable anniversary shows were definitely some of the bigger things we ever did.
And that was a Chili Pepper down in Fort Lauderdale, right?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Did you go to shows there before when it was called The Edge?
Yes. Yeah, I'd seen some shows down there. there's so many shows you kind of forget, like, well, what shows did you see at the Edge, or the Button versus, Respectables versus Cameo or whatever. But yeah, I'd been to the Edge, and then of course it switched to Chili Pepper. So I don't remember the exact year that happened, but yeah, as soon as we hit 21, we were trying to hit as many places as we could and see, every band that we could for sure.
Did you ever make it out to Churchill's in Miami?
Yes, yeah, we went to Churchill's and saw some bands. We actually played at Churchill's once.
Oh yeah.
One Dog's Opinion. We played with the Moldy Figs, which was a really cool band. Those guys were great dudes, and I think they had played in a couple bands, and at that point, that was that version of a band they were playing in, the Moldy Figs. So yeah, we did get to play Churchill's once as well, Washington Square once as well. So.
Before, I think Churchill's closed. I could be wrong, but I think Churchill's has closed. But
Think so.
Respectable Street is still
Still
alive and
going.
well. So you really got a chance to play at the last two survivors of what remained, at least from Palm Beach. I don't think anything from Broward really survived from that era.
I don't
So
think
it
so.
was either
No.
Respectable Street or Churchill's, and you got to play both. So
Both of them,
pretty
absolutely.
cool.
And with regards to Respectables, when they first opened, they sent in a reporter from the Palm Beach Post. And I remember there was a guy standing on this ladder this one night, and he's taking all these pictures, and they did an article. And I still have the newspaper actually in my chest of treasures. And it was talking about this new club, and there's this picture looking down, and there I am right in the middle of the crowd on, the Respects open, and I was there because it was like, we got an alternative thing there. So we did a reunion show in 2018, and I wanted to do it at Respectables. And Steve Rollman was booking things, and we ended up playing at Voltaire because he said it would be a better thing. Well, now Voltaire is closed, and I'm regretting that we didn't do it at Respectables, because to me that's the Mecca, and it's still standing. And every time I come down to West Palm to hang out or anything, I try to at least go by and see the place, and pay my respects to the bar that started it, the club that started it for me. So
What was that reunion show like? Because I imagine it had been a while since you guys had played.
it had been 9 years since we had played. It was 9 years since we had even been in the same room together. So we had, as usual, we quote unquote ended in 2003, and we did a reunion show in 2006, and then we did a reunion show in 2009 up here in Tennessee. And as usual, just like with 2018, we had 2 nights to practice. We hadn't seen each other in 9 years. We hadn't been in the same room, played the songs or anything. So we had 2 nights to practice. We went up to our buddy Matt Berger's place, and he let us jam. So as our usual, throw it together and let's pull this off. And we decided it was the anniversary of, it was the 20-year anniversary of recording I Will Name You Roy. So we decided we were going to play the song in its entirety, the album in its entirety, as it was, as it was recorded. So we went up and played the album as well. Had a blast. 2 other bands had come together that night. Remember the Ocean was a local band. They did a reunion show with us at the same time, and another band called Miracle Strip out of Gainesville. So the whole night was like a reunion show. But yeah, we were 9 years, hadn't been in the same room, hadn't played the songs. I started about 6 months early playing to the CD, trying to remember all the songs and getting my voice back up, because I haven't really done much since then. I still play, acoustically and write stuff here and there, but playing in a band and singing songs that you recorded 20 years earlier was a task for me. So I started way early getting ready for that gig, but it was a blast. We enjoyed it, and there's a rumor, because I was just talking to Rob Elba from Holy Tears. He moved out to California recently, and every year they do that Dan Hosker, memorial show, and this year is reunions. So he's all but talked us into getting together and coming down in December and doing a reunion gig to celebrate the the ever incredible and amazing Dan Hosker and support his cause. So there could be a One Dog's Opinion reunion coming up this December down in Miami or Fort Lauderdale, wherever it's going to be.
Yeah, I think it's in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, Fort Lauderdale, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well,
don't hold your breath, but cross your fingers.
I'll say that's breaking news if that is
Absolutely.
what happens. So because the other reunion was back in 2018,
Yes, sir.
which doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was, I guess, a little
I
bit.
know. I was thinking that the other day. I'm like, well, we just played. And I was like, damn, that's 6 years ago.
Yeah,
Okay,
6 years ago,
wow.
right? So
So yeah, so it's going to be 6 more years since we played, but
wow.
I'm trying to get it done. So hopefully we can get Jonathan now lives back in Texas and Rob's in North Carolina and so back then we were in Indiana, North Carolina, and Tennessee. So only one guy's moved, but we got it all together to come back in 2018. So it's just I'm blessed with these guys that we can literally go 9 years, sit down and rehearse 6 hours and play a gig and pull it off that, we may have to look at each other every once in a while and go, what's that chord real quick? But we've gelled from day one with these guys. I've known Rob since 1981. We went to high school together, played in some bands together. And the last version of One Dog's Opinion, we were 7, 8 years, the same three guys playing in a band. So we practiced 2 nights a week religiously and played as many gigs as we could. So we can get together after 9 years, practice for 5 hours and play a gig.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're blessed.
When it comes to the legacy of One Dog's Opinion, in terms of some of the other band members too, like what do you think everyone's thoughts are just on the legacy of the band?
Other guys who played in the band as well?
Yeah. From your conversations you may have had with other members over the years.
I think it's been amazing. I mean, I played with some really cool guys. As far as One Dog's Opinion played, there's really only three other guys that played. There was another bass player, Daryl Shea, who played in the first version of it. Kevin Turner, who was actually Hooded Woodies and then became One Dogs. I'm still in touch with all these guys. We're still great friends, and they love the music that came out later, and the fact that we just kind of digitized that live show has Mike McGuire on drums and Daryl Shea on bass. I just sent it to those guys and it was like, just brings up great memories and, what a force we were even back then and how much fun we had. And so they loved it that one, I kept the band kind of going and the music legacy of One Dog's Opinion going, even though it switched to some other people. They all still dig it. We're all still friends. We chat with each other as much as possible. Almost everybody's still playing except for me for the most part. It's the drummer and Rob, he plays in a bluegrass band, cousin Amy up in North Carolina, and Mike plays in a band up in Virginia, cover band. So they're all still doing it. They all still love it, and they love what became of the band and the fact that that I kept playing as well, because we didn't have any animosity. It was just people came and went and we kept playing. And so they love it. I love it. I support them and they support me. And hopefully we'll still make music together.
Certainly. And if you play in December, that would be a reunion worth seeing as well as any other bands. And I mean, it's South Florida. So there's a lot of bands who could reunite for a memorial like that. So I'll have to keep posted to see.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted because if it happens, anything to support Dan Hosker, and if Rob Elba's involved, I'm shocked we haven't done anything to this point and actually done a show down there. But yeah, any way I can support those guys, I'll be there for sure. And if I can get the band together, that's just another reason to hang out with my friends and turn it up and get loud and crazy.
Absolutely. And speaking of Rob Elba, real quick, have you ever done Rob's podcast, That Record Got Me High?
No, and I give him a bunch of stuff about that. And he's talked about it, but I'm like, I'd known you for over 30 years, and you're doing all this stuff and you haven't once asked me to be on your show. It's like I see how it is, but so
Well, I know Rob listens to this podcast or watches this
good.
podcast, however Rob gets it. And Rob, if you're checking this episode out, I think it's time to have Bobby on your podcast because I'm
Knowing
sure
Rob,
I'm sure Bobby has a record or two that got him high. So
just
just putting
about
that out
all of
there.
it. Yeah. But knowing Rob, he's going to go, no, no, I'll just watch this one and we're good. So I don't have to do it anymore.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. But let me just tell you, Bobby, it's been great having you on the podcast. I'm so thankful that you took the time out to, share the story of yourself and what your journey was like from your early beginnings all throughout, and your time with the Hooded Woodies and your time One Dog's Opinion and all the other things that kind of happened in between, you going to shows all across, different parts of Florida, but especially the centric part of Palm Beach, because there's not a lot of stories out there, and which is why it was so great to have Gino on and perhaps other people over the course of time. But I appreciate it very much, you coming on to tell that story.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I watch your show and I've caught up with other people. And as I said to you on the phone before, I appreciate that you're doing this because nobody else is. And there's just this huge gap of years, decades there that people just don't know about. And, if you weren't around in 91, 92, 93, you don't know who, kind of influenced the scene for the later bands and, who helped build it. But without you, I mean, there is no voice. So I'm, grateful to have you and be able to get on your show because I do enjoy it and I watch it.
I really appreciate that, Bobby. Thank you for those kind words. And again, to have you on here to tell the story is really appreciated. And hopefully people will get a chance to see you again out there on a Florida stage. And that should be hopefully something to look forward to. And as we get ready to start to close things out, I want to give you the last word. Any final thoughts you want to share? Kind of close out our episode today. The floor is yours.
All right. Just as I say to anybody, support local music first and foremost. These bands are out there busting their butt for no money and just sweat and tears just to do their thing. But there were a few people I wanted to say real quick. Steve Ruhlman, Matt Reynolds, Rodney Mayo, Ray Carbone, Melissa Galucci, and Jeremy Staska are some people that really kind of set us up. And without those people back in the day, and Norm from the Harvey Building, I'm sure you're not alive anymore, but thanks for letting us practice downtown for many years, and all the places that supported us and the clubs that allowed us to play and all the bands from back in the day, the blessings that we've got to play with. It was an amazing ride and a fun time, and I'm glad I came up at the time I did, and I wouldn't change a thing. But I'm going to be coming out with something new here eventually. I'm an old dinosaur that bought Logic Pro, so I'm going to try to figure out this digital stuff. But I've got something else to say as far as music's concerned. So if I'm blessed, this year or next year, there's going to be the long-awaited, never-anticipated album that nobody wanted from One Dog's Opinion.